We're in the book of John. We finished up chapter 6. Jesus healed, or not healed, he fed 5,000 men. That's beside women and children. Jesus walked on water in this chapter, preached a sermon about the bread of life there in the synagogue in Capernaum. And as a result of that sermon, what happened? Many of his disciples stopped following him. And then the chapter closes with, Jesus saying to the 12, will you also go away? And Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we believe and are sure that thou art that Christ. So that's chapter 6 in a nutshell. By the way, what's unique about the feeding of the 5,000? Does anybody remember? There's something unique about this. It's the only miracle recorded in all 4 gospel accounts. This it's interesting. Some miracles are in 1 or 2 or even 3. This one is in all 4. I was looking over some notes, just kind of an overview of chapter 6 to see if there was anything in. These are notes from Reagan's dad, just to see if there's anything we overlooked. The main theme of chapter 6, though, is Jesus is the bread of life. If I were going to sum it up in a nutshell, that brings to mind the feeding of the 5,000, but that also brings to mind his bread of life sermon. I think we pretty well covered it. And one of the big lessons here in chapter 6 also is, it does no good to have a huge following if people are not. We sometimes use the expression with the program. Jesus is not going to compromise just to have numbers. And too often, if we're not careful, we get into compromise for the sake of numbers. What I think that comes down to a lot of times, is especially I think it can be the case for preachers if we're not careful, is ego. It's just the idea that, I've got a lot of people in the congregation where I preach. Is it good to have a lot of people? Sure, if they're following the Lord faithfully. But what we have to understand, whether preacher, elder, deacon, Bible class teacher, whatever, is if people are truly converted, they're not following because, the preacher is great or the Bible class teacher is great. And that's not to say that they're not necessarily doing a good job, but it has to be about following the Lord. And if it's not, then there's a problem. And I think I've mentioned before, there was a preacher I used to work with that he made the statement, and it kind of stuck with me. He said, whatever it takes to get someone is what it will take to keep them. And so if you're using gimmicks and that kind of thing to get folks in, then you're going to have to constantly up the game with the gimmicks to keep them. But if you get them with the gospel, with the Lord, then he satisfies. And that's what it takes to keep them. You keep preaching the gospel. You keep teaching the Bible. And so sometimes we fall prey to the temptation to compromise for the sake of numbers. So we want to stay away from that, of course, and that's one of the lessons we learned in chapter 6. But going into chapter 7, after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, but because the Jews sought to kill him. So I think we closed out last week talking about the period of controversy is pretty well, the end of chapter 6 marks the end of that, what we call the period of controversy. Now chapter 7 begins the period of conflict. Minds are pretty well set. There are some that are not, and you'll see that even right here in chapter 7. But a lot of folks' minds are very much so set in terms of many of them rejecting Jesus. He's not the Christ. He's not even someone that we want to even tolerate around, and so they begin to plot to kill him. And he knows that, of course. So his enemies want to kill him, and they're waiting for the opportune time. The Jews' Feast of Tabernacles is at hand, verse 2 tells us. And so his brethren therefore said unto him, depart hence and go into Judea, that thy disciples also may see the works that thou doest. So they say, they basically say, why don't you go public and show everybody if you're so special? And verse 4 is or it's not verse 4, it's verse 5 is a commentary on this. Go read on through verse 4. For there is no man that doeth anything in secret, and he himself seeketh to be known openly. If thou do these things, show thyself to the world, for neither did his brethren believe in him. And so they're saying, if you're so special, go public. Show everybody how great and how special you are. They don't believe. And so again, it's this idea of sign seeking. We want to see some kind of a sign, and almost mockingly saying, go on, show yourself to the world if you're so special. So they don't believe on him either. They're not trying to promote the kingdom. They're being sarcastic. Yes, sir. Sometimes it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Most difficult for those closest to us. Maybe they thought of, well, Jesus he's not the Christ. He's not special. We grew up with him. Maybe that's how they thought of it. But, just like all the other Jews, they had the evidence. They've seen the miracles. It's there. Undeniable miracles. How can a person who, if he's just a regular old man, do these miracles? The teaching, so unique. Over and over again, the evidence is there. But yeah, here are people, his own brothers in the flesh, and these will be half brothers, obviously, because Joseph was not Jesus' father. But they don't believe. And so Jesus says to them, he answers them, verse 6, my time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. He's saying he's not on their timetable. I have a note here. God always does things in time and on time. It reminds you of Galatians 4:4, right? When the fullness of time was come, God sent forth a son, made of a woman, made under the law. So God always does things in time and on time. And that's still true today. So he tells them, my time's not yet come. I'm not on your timetable. That's what he tells them essentially. The world cannot hate you, he goes on, but me it hateth, because I testify of it that the works thereof are evil. The world can't, this is a theme Jesus iterates a lot in his teaching. The world's not going to hate its own. And so if we're a part of the world, they're not going to hate us. But if you stand apart from the world, it's kind of like that concept of the light shining in the darkness scatters. So Jesus says, the world can't hate its own. But because I testify of it, that the works thereof are evil, it hates me. He goes on and says, go ye up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto this feast. Yet is the key word there, for my time is not yet full come. When he had said these words unto them, he abode still in Galilee. But when his brethren were gone up, then went he also up into the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. It's not that he's trying to sneak around. He's just not going, out in the open. And there's a reason for that, as he says, my time is not yet come. He's going to go in his time when he's ready, and he's not going to travel in the big caravan. This was very common at that time, that when they were going up to a feast, large groups, might be an extended family, but then a lot of times an extended family travels with an extended family, and of course you can imagine that makes sense because there's safety in numbers and so on. But Jesus is not going to travel with the large caravan that's going together. He's going to travel on his own for obvious reasons, because they're seeking him. The Jews sought him at the feast, verse 11, and said, where is he? Now they're seeking him to kill him. We'll find that out in this chapter. They're looking for him to kill him. It's interesting. Some people seek Jesus for worship. You think about the wise men. They came to see, we sometimes say baby Jesus, but really he'd been about 2 years old, kind of more or less a toddler. But they came to see Jesus, and they said, we've come to worship him. Then you have some people who seek Jesus for salvation. Some people seek Jesus for a show. That's what some folks just kind of wanted. You saw that in chapter 6. I don't know if it's more of a show as much as a meal. But some people, they want that, entertain me, feed me, kind of mentality. And then some people seek Jesus, or at least in this context, sought Jesus to kill him. That's why they're not looking for him going, wow, we want to sit at his feet and learn. We want to learn about God. No, they're looking for Jesus because they want to seize him. They've had it, and that's why we say this begins the period of conflict. Their minds are made up, these Jewish leaders. They're not considering Jesus anymore. There's not even controversy at this point so much as they're ready. We got to get rid of this guy. He is a thorn in the side, and we need to be rid of him. So they're seeking him to kill him. And I have a note here in my notes that says, why do you seek Jesus? That's a question we all have to ask ourselves. Why are we seeking Jesus? There are some people that seek Jesus to please their parents or to please a spouse. You have some people that even seek Jesus to get business. It may be a business thing. I got a lot of contacts at this congregation. Or it may be that some people have this kind of an idea of seeking Jesus for good luck, just kind of a good luck charm. Or do we seek Jesus for eternal life? But in getting on into verse 12 or 11, I don't think we read 11 yet. Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, "Where is he?" And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him, for some said, "He's a good man." Others said, "Nay, but he deceiveth the people." Howbeit no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. And this would be the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, we sometimes refer to them. So they don't really know what to make of him. Some people say he's a decent person. They say he's a good man, a decent person. Some people say he's a deceiver. They say he's deceiving the people there at the end of verse 12. Some people say, you'll see in verse 20, he's a devil or a demon. He's got a demon. And then you get to around verse 26, some people say he is deity. You also see this in 41. Others said this is the Christ. So some people said he was a decent man. Some people said no, he's a deceiver. And then some people said he has a demon. But some people said, and rightly so, this man is deity. He is God in the flesh. And of course that's who he was. So they're looking for Jesus. There's kind of this controversy going on. Who is he? What is he? Is he a good man? Is he a deceiver? Is he just, a great teacher? But, again, we've pointed this out several times, and especially in the study of the book of John, you can't miss it. The evidence is there. He is divine. He is deity. And so over and over again, the evidence is there. We've used the illustration before. I think it was C.S. Lewis who maybe originally came up with this statement that he is either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. There really are no other choices for Jesus. You look at the logic he used and how such penetrating, sharp logic, it's impossible that he was just some crazy person. So lunatic can be ruled out. But then you have, was he just a liar? Well, people don't just willingly lay down their lives when they're just telling a lie. And over again, you can see where no one could find any fault in him. And that, of course, leaves one choice. That is, he is Lord. So, verse 14. Nobody spoke openly of him. Verse 13 tells us because they were afraid of those religious leaders. So some people at least know they're out to get him. So they're careful. They're starting to be careful about what they say at this point because they know they're after Jesus. They want him gone, and if you don't want to be gone too, you don't want to be associated with him. So some people are beginning to shrink back because of that. 14 tells us now about the midst of the feast, middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. So now he's there, he's in the temple, and he's going to begin teaching. And the Jews marveled, saying, "How knoweth this man letters, having never learned?" They want to know, how does he know how to read and write, not having had that formal education? So he makes his appearance. He doesn't have this formal training that they would expect to be able to read and write. Now, he goes on and says, verse 16, my doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me. So he's going to say, it's not my doctrine. This comes from the Father. And so is this an answer to their question about, how can he read and write? Now, verse 17 is a key verse. He says, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. Who's got New King James there? Let's just word it a little bit differently. Go ahead and read that, please. Very, very similar, but just a slight change there. If anyone, or if any wills to do his doctrine. A lot of times when you see the word will in the King James, if any man, is that how it's worded? Yeah, if any man will do his will, it's the idea there, if anyone desires to do his will. If you want to follow God, he says, you'll know. You'll know of the doctrine, whether it's of God or whether I speak of my own authority. A little slight change there in the New King James there as well that gets that sense. Is he going based on the Father's authority or his own authority? And he says, if you really want to know God's will, he'll make sure you do. So that's an interesting statement there. And Jesus says, if you want to know his will, you will know of the doctrine, whether it's of God, whether I speak of myself. He goes on and says, he that speaketh of himself seeketh his own glory. But he that seeketh his glory that sent him, the same is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. Of course, no one else could make that statement. No unrighteousness is in him. That obviously is true of Jesus being God in the flesh. Did not Moses give you the law, he says, and yet none of you keepeth the law? Why go ye about to kill me? Now they answer, verse 20, the people answered and said, thou hast a devil, or thou hast a demon. Who goeth about to kill thee? Well, I guess there's two options here. They're either just telling a complete lie. Maybe they're playing dumb just because they don't want to admit what they're up to. They don't want to admit what they've been plotting to do, and that is to kill him. Or it could be some of the ones here that don't know of this plot. Some did, some did not. So they may say, what are you talking about? I tend to think the accusation being made, oh, you have a demon. If they really didn't know, I don't think they would throw that out. So I think you're probably dealing with people here that are just lying. We sometimes say, you're lying through your teeth. They are just telling a complete lie to cover up their true intentions. So they say, what? You're crazy. Who wants to kill you? And so now, it's they try everything in the world they can think of to stop the people from following Jesus, stop the people from listening to Jesus, to get rid of him, and of course eventually to the point of getting him crucified. Now they're trying to discredit him by saying, oh, you're crazy. Folks, listen to him. Who here is trying to kill him? He's talking about people want to kill him? This guy's clearly crazy. So now they're trying to portray him as a lunatic. But it's not going to work, obviously, because he's going to go on, and he just kind of ignores that at this point and says, I've done one work, and you all marvel. Now he's going to go back to the healing of chapter 5, kind of that set off. It began this controversy. And, we talked about that's within that period of controversy. It was touched off because he healed a man on the Sabbath day. And so he's told him, if you desire to do God's will. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned this with verse 17. We're talking about what a key verse that is. Don't forget what he's saying here too is he's speaking to those religious leaders, and he's pointing out to them and to us. God's will never be known by a proud mind. When you have a mind that is filled with pride and selfishness, that person will not follow God's will. But he says, if you'll put aside your pride, come to God humbly and desire honestly to know his will, you'll know it. And so he begins to defend himself. And he says, verse 19, he's telling them that Moses gave you the law and yet you don't keep it. Now, keeping the law doesn't save anybody, right? Because You can keep the law, but sin is, 1 John 3:4, what? Transgression of the law. So everybody at some point sins, Romans 3:23. And so you could keep the law and add up all the law keeping you've done, but it doesn't take away a single sin. So law keeping is not going to save anyone. Is it important though? Sure. But he's saying to them, Moses gave you the law, but you don't even keep the law. They've got such pride in their law, and Moses gave us the law, and he says, you don't keep the law. It's a farce. They act like they're so spiritual and they're so righteous. He says, you don't keep the law. In fact, they had their own traditions. We'll see this in other places, and especially places like Mark 7 and Matthew 15 is a parallel. They had their own traditions that they elevated above the law. And there were many times when nobody had violated the law of Moses. They had violated the Jews' tradition. And so they would act like you were some kind of big sinner because you'd violated their tradition. So he says, Moses gave you the law, but you don't keep the law. I've done one work, getting back to verse 21, and you all marvel. Moses therefore gave unto you circumcision, not because it is of Moses, but of the fathers, and you on the Sabbath day circumcise a man. If a man on the Sabbath day receives circumcision, that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry at me because I have made a man every whit whole on the Sabbath day? And then he says this, judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. They were upset. This was all sort of started because he had healed a man on the Sabbath. He didn't violate the law of Moses. He violated their tradition. And so they were upset about that, and he's pointing out to them, I didn't do anything that violated the law of Moses. And he's pointing out how they would circumcise on the Sabbath day. If that's when the eighth day fell, circumcision was to take place on the eighth day. If that's when it fell, they proceeded. And they understood that was not a violation of the Sabbath. And he says, likewise, to heal on the Sabbath, that's not a violation of the Sabbath law. 24 is also one of those key verses here because, people sometimes want to talk about Matthew 7:1, judge not that you be not judged. But they forget that Jesus never taught don't judge, period. He says don't judge hypocritically, don't judge unrighteous judgment, don't judge according to the appearance. There is righteous judgment, however. We've pointed out before, if somebody says, oh, don't judge, well, they're judging. Just by making that statement, you're judging me to be guilty of unrighteous judging. And so, there's never a time when you cannot judge. If you're going to have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, Ephesians 5:11, you have to judge who is the unfruitful works of darkness. That's a judgment that's got to be made. In the whole context of Matthew 7, Jesus talks about wolves in sheep's clothing, remember? Well, how would you ever know that what appears to be a sheep is actually a wolf in sheep's clothing? You have to make a judgment. And he talks about, fruit inspecting. By their fruits you shall know them. That requires a judgment. So don't lose that point there. He says essentially, get your facts straight before you make a judgment. That's what he's telling them. It's not wrong to judge as long as you judge righteously, according to the facts, according to the evidence. And that's what he's telling them. And that's interesting because that's all he's asking them to do with regard to who he is. He's not saying just accept me when I say I'm the Christ. He says here are miracles, here's teaching, here are all these, the testimony of the Father, the testimony of John. We talked about all those witnesses back all the way in chapter 5, which he's referencing back to right here in chapter 7. And he says the evidence is there. Judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment means to understand he is the Christ. So there's kind of a extra point there to be made that it tells them he is the Christ. Then said some of them, verse 25, of Jerusalem, is not this he whom they seek to kill? Well, again, at least some people know about this plot, because some of them say, hey, isn't this the guy that they're trying to kill, that they want to take out of the way here? This is him. So some people know about the plot. Doesn't seem like everybody knows. But they say, lo, he speaketh boldly, and they say nothing unto him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is the very Christ? So they say, is this the one they seek to kill? He's just speaking openly in the temple. This must be the Christ. Now they go on, verse 27, and say, howbeit we know this man whence he is. Well, we know this is Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth, we know where he's from. But when Christ cometh, no man knoweth whence he is. Now, what's the problem with this statement? They've got a preconceived notion here that doesn't fit. You were going to say something, Ms. Joyce? Yeah, let's look at Micah. Go to the book of Micah. This is just one example, but yeah, you're right. It talks about it throughout. But let's look at Micah 5. Somebody read verse 2, please. Okay, this is just one example, but certainly serves the purpose. There are others, but he says Bethlehem, and there were two Bethlehems, so he specifies Bethlehem Ephratah, and he says, out of you will come the Messiah. But now over here in 27, they say, John 7:27, they say, howbeit we know this man whence he is, but when Christ cometh, no man knoweth whence he is. It kind of reminds you of Jesus' statement in Matthew 22. You do err not knowing the Scriptures. They didn't know their Bible very well here. They said, well, nobody knows where the Christ is going to come from. We know exactly where this guy comes from. But the Bible did tell them. As Joyce pointed out, there are numerous passages in the Old Testament that talk about the Christ and the seed line and the timing and even the place of birth. Micah 5:2 specified it. So, he's going to tell them here in verses 28 and 29, you've got the evidence. You know where I'm from. Look there, beginning verse 28. Then cried Jesus in the temple as he taught, saying, you both know me, and you know whence I am, and I am not come of myself, but he that sent me is true, whom ye know not. Talking about the Father there. But I know him, for I am from him, and he hath sent me. Then, verse 30, they sought to take him, but no man laid hands on him because his hour was not yet come. Of course, God is in complete control of this whole situation. Some of the people kind of reasoned it out, verse 31. Many of the people believed on him and said, when Christ comes, will he do more miracles than these which this man hath done? Well, that's logical reasoning there. Okay, we're looking for the Christ. Will he do more miracles than this man? I mean, it's just... It's miracle after miracle. He's teaching, and his teaching is very unique. And in fact, we're going to see it right here in this very chapter. What is it, verse 46? Never man spake like this man. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, they were amazed because he taught as authority and not as the scribes. It's just evidence after evidence. And some people here finally are reasoning it out, and they're going, well, who else could this be but the Christ? But some of them still... They sought him to lay hold on him, but his hour was not yet come, verse 30. And it's interesting, God's in complete control of this whole situation. His hour is not yet come, so they're not going to be able to lay hands on him yet. But some are coming to the logical conclusion. verse 32, the Pharisees heard that the people murmured such things concerning him, such things being, when the Christ comes, will he do more miracles than this man? So when they heard that, the Pharisees and the chief priests sent officers to take him. Well, they decide now we've got this is the time. The time is ripe to take him because he's starting to draw away people. Some people are starting to reason it out. And again, it's that pride and it's that jealousy and not going to give up our position. He's not going to come along and be the leader of this people. We are the religious leaders. And so they decide, you know what, we got to do something here. So they send officers to take him. So now Jesus, it comes back to Jesus, he's teaching, and then said Jesus unto them, yet a little while am I with you, and then I go unto him that sent me. You shall seek me, and shall not find me, and where I am, thither you cannot come. Of course, referring to his crucifixion and ascension back up into heaven. He's talking about his future circumstances. The people are not going to be able to follow him there when he ascends back into heaven. But the Jews, of course, what's the theme in the book of John? Or not theme necessarily, but happens a lot in the book of John. Jesus will make a spiritual statement or a spiritual comparison, and they will take it very literally. And so, then said the Jews among themselves, whither will he go that we shall not find him? Will he go into the dispersed among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? There's a Greek word, I think it's diaspora or diasporia, but it just means the dispersion. And sometimes they talk about that during a lot of intertestamental period and some of the things going on after the northern kingdom fell and then later the southern kingdom fell. Some of the Jews did not return home. Some of them dispersed into various parts of the world, and so they would talk about the dispersion. If you lived right there in Palestine, you were kind of in, Palestine proper, but if you lived somewhere else out in Gentile lands, then you were part of the dispersion. So that's what they're talking about here. So he's talking about he's going to die on the cross, be raised from the dead, and ascend into heaven, a spiritual application. They start thinking, well, how's he going to go somewhere we can't follow? Is he going to go out among the dispersion? They, knowing that we're not going to go out there looking for him. Of course, they have absolutely no jurisdiction out there, so that's what they're thinking of. What manner of saying is this, verse 36, that he said, you shall seek me and shall not find me, and where I am, thither you cannot come. Now, verse 37, in the last day, that great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried, saying, if any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. Let's go ahead and get verse 39. Verse 39, but this spake he of the Spirit which they that believe on him should receive, for the Holy Ghost was not yet given, because that Jesus was not yet glorified. Many of the people, therefore, when they heard this saying, said, of a truth, this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. Again, they're making that unnecessary, unbiblical distinction between the prophet and the Christ, or that prophet sometimes. Others said, this is the Christ, but some said, shall Christ come out of Galilee? Let's stop there because we're going to get some more points here. But there's a very long, interesting section in Brother, if I remember correctly, I didn't write this down in my notes, or the source, but I'm positive it was from Brother Guy and Wood's commentary on the book of John. But there was a custom at the Feast of Tabernacles. Of course, that's where all this is taking place here in chapter 7. There was a custom on that last day of the feast. The priest, he would pour out water on the altar, and they would follow with a reading of Psalm 113 through 118. But he would pour out water on the altar, and this was symbolic of God's care for them during their wilderness wanderings. But he would pour this water out, and so Jesus' statement here would be a powerful illustration at the end of this ceremony. The priest pours out that water, it represents God's care, and so Jesus says, perhaps even as that's happening or right after, if any man comes unto me and drink, he that believeth on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. We learned when Rob Whitaker and I went down to the forget what the name of that place is. It's a biblical history museum, basically, in LaGrange. I still want our congregation, to plan a trip. Maybe we could do one with the young folks and one with any of the adults who want to go. But a fascinating place. But the guy was telling us, water in the Middle East is a big deal because there's a lot of, very dry areas. And so sometimes you have places, and of course, in Palestine, is one of the reasons God settled them there in a land with a whole lot of desert. You have a lot of water available there in Palestine, the Promised Land area. But sometimes you have water, and you have, like Abraham, he wandered a lot, right? So he would sometimes have to store water. But you have all these issues with stored water, because what happens to stored water? It gets old, and, sometimes it can be susceptible to germs. It can breed, mosquitoes and things like that, and just not taste very good. So if you are out and about and you're really, really thirsty, maybe you've been working hard, and do you want to come home and have to reach into that cistern and get water that's been there a while? What's the better option? You go and find a stream, a creek, a brook, and it's got moving water, running water. And so it's so much better, right? And sometimes even, you end up with disease from water that's been sitting for a long time. And so it became known among the ancients as living water. Running water was living water. It's fresh, it's often cool, and life-giving, literally. And so it's an interesting point when you hear Jesus or other writers talk about living water. That's what they mean. It's running water. In fact, I have a note right here at the end of this verse in my Bible that says running water. Right there with the footnote is at living. So living water, running water. So on the last day of the feast, the priest is pouring out water on the altar. Imagine how powerful this illustration is to the people when Jesus says, basically, I am the living water. I am the water of life. So he's talking there about the Spirit that's going to be given to those who believe later on. But, and then you have this dispute again. Is he a prophet, or is he that prophet? Or is he simply, is he the Christ? Is he that prophet? Again, that's the same thing. When you talk about Deuteronomy 18, Moses saying, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you. That's talking about the Christ, the Messiah. These are all synonymous terms. They somehow or another made a distinction that is not there in Scripture. Verse 39, of course, is going to be fulfilled on Pentecost with the Spirit coming. Then, I was looking for something else. Let's stop right there at verse. I've got a paragraph marker at 40. We read 40 and 41, but we'll come back and mention that because there's more that I want to talk about there with verse 42. I hope we could get through chapter 7 today, but there's this controversy. Is he that prophet? Is he the Christ? And we'll pick up there. As you've probably noticed already, the controversy, the conflict is really ramping up here in chapter 7. And it's going to get kind of to a fever pitch around chapter 8, chapter 9 or so. And the people are determined we are absolutely 100% going to kill this man. They are not going to be happy. They're not going to rest until they've accomplished that. And again, remember, a lot of the book of John, the last part of John, you got a lot of text that covers only about 1 week of the life of Jesus. So it's really reaching a fever pitch here. They want to be rid of him. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we'll have a break before our worship period.